In a world that often demands justice, sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is mercy. Explore the complex stories of forgiveness and the incredible strength it takes to let go of the past. Subscribe now to experience these deeply moving human dramas.
My daughter planned her engagement party to be the night she finally buried me. She didn't know I'd already risen. My name is Opal Mercer, and for 19 years my only daughter believed I chose a bottle over her. She believed it because her father told her so, because his mother confirmed it, because every birthday card I sent went unanswered, and every voicemail I left disappeared into silence. They built a version of me out of half-truths and convenient lies, and they handed it to my daughter like inheritance. She accepted it the way children accept everything from the people who raise them, completely without question. Because what else do you do when the adults around you agree on something? I was 63 years old, sitting in the sunroom of a house I owned, watching the cardinals at my feeder, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. Something in my chest already knew. Eleanor. Not Mom. Not Mother. Just my name, flat and careful, like she was reading it off a form. It's Naomi. The cardinals kept eating. The world kept turning. My daughter's voice, which I hadn't heard since she was 7 years old, had grown into something low and measured and guarded. She sounded like a woman who had learned to be careful with her words. "I'm having an engagement party," she said. "Dalton and I. 3 weeks from Saturday. I'm sending you the address." My heart cracked open like a window in a storm. For 1 second, just one, I let myself believe it was an olive branch. I let myself imagine she'd been looking for me, that someone had told her the truth. Then she kept talking. "I thought you should be there," she said. And her voice took on an edge I recognized, the careful cruelty of someone who has rehearsed. "Everyone who matters to me will be there. His family, my colleagues, my friends. I figured they should finally meet the woman who raised me." She paused. Or didn't. I understood then. She wasn't inviting me to celebrate. She was inviting me to perform. To stand in the corner in whatever sad, secondhand life she imagined I was living, so her future in-laws could see exactly what she'd overcome. I was supposed to be the cautionary tale at the party, the proof of how far she'd come despite me. I sat very still for a moment. The cardinals flew away. "I'll be there," I said. Then I set the phone down on the wicker table, and I looked out at the garden, and I did not cry. I stopped crying over Naomi the day I understood that grief, if you let it, will hollow you out until there's nothing left to rebuild. But to understand why my daughter looked at me like something she'd scraped off her shoe, I have to take you back to a version of my life I've spent 20 years trying to outlive. I married Clifford Beaumont when I was 26. He was 10 years older than me, a civil engineer, the kind of man who seems solid the way old buildings seem solid, until you find out what's rotting inside the walls. His mother, Estelle, had the smile of a woman who decided immediately that I wasn't good enough and spent the next decade proving herself right. I was a bookkeeper from a working-class family. She was old Birmingham money, 3 generations of it, and she let me feel the difference every single time I walked into her house. We had Naomi when I was 28. She came out with Clifford's nose and my stubbornness, and from the moment I held her, everything made sense in a way nothing in my life ever had before. I was made for this, I thought. I can do this one thing right, whatever else I fail at. I failed at my marriage first. Clifford drank. Not every day, not visibly, not in the way that gets noticed at first. He drank the way some men lie, quietly with plausible deniability, in ways that always allowed him to blame something else. The business stress, the long hours. Me. When he started staying out, I suspected. When cash started disappearing from our joint account, I asked. When I found the receipts, bars, hotels, a jeweler on Fifth that I had never visited, I confronted him. What happened next was swift and surgical. Within a week, Clifford had moved in with his mother and filed for divorce on grounds of my alleged alcohol dependency. His lawyer produced a witness, Estelle's neighbor, a woman I had met twice, who swore she'd seen me drunk and disorderly in the front yard. Clifford's own sister testified that I was unstable, erratic, and unfit. I had never had a drinking problem. I was a bookkeeper who drank a glass of wine at dinner and nothing more. But Clifford's family had money and connections, and a lawyer who made me sound like a cautionary tale, and my public defender had 40 other cases and no appetite for a fight. I lost custody of Naomi in a courtroom that smelled like carpet cleaner and indifference. She was 7. She stood in the hallway in a yellow dress holding Estelle's hand, and when they walked her past me, she looked up at me with those large dark eyes, and I saw the confusion there, the damage already being done. "Mama," she said. That's the last time she called me that. What they don't tell you about losing your child to a custody ruling is that the loss isn't clean. It festers. Because she was still alive, still in the world. I could still see her in the curve of every little girl her age, in every yellow dress, in every handwritten note I composed and sent and waited for a response. To that never came. Clifford got supervised visitation approved in theory, but in practice Estelle controlled the schedule, and Estelle had ways of making sure visits were inconvenient, canceled, restructured until they simply stopped happening. I sent Naomi cards every birthday, every Christmas. Estelle intercepted them. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Then I only knew the silence, and the silence was its own kind of prison. I moved to Atlanta. I took a job with a small accounting firm that didn't ask too many questions about the gap in my work history. I rented a one-room apartment with a hot plate and a view of a parking garage. I went to work. I came home. I did not drink, not because I had ever been a drinker, but because I became deeply and almost superstitiously careful about anything that could be used against me again. At night, I read personal finance, tax law, real estate investing. I had always been good with numbers. That was what made me a decent bookkeeper. But I began to understand that there was a difference between managing other people's money and building your own. 3 years after the divorce, I met a woman named Viola at a continuing education class on small business accounting. She was 62, recently retired from 30 years as a tax attorney, sharp as a tack and tired of being quiet about it. We became friends the way women do when they're both carrying things. Slowly, carefully, and then all at once. Viola listened to my story over coffee in a diner on Peachtree. She didn't flinch. She didn't offer advice I hadn't asked for. When I finished, she set down her cup and looked at me with the kind of directness that only comes from a lifetime of courtrooms. "You were set up by a man with resources and a mother with connections," she said. "And your daughter doesn't know it yet. But she might, one day, if you're still standing when that day comes." She let me move into her spare bedroom while I got back on my feet. She reviewed my financials, helped me form an LLC, walked me through the process of buying my first property, a small duplex in a neighborhood that everyone else had given up on. I bought it for $18,000 and spent 4 months making it livable with secondhand tools and YouTube tutorials, and Viola standing in the doorway drinking coffee and calling out instructions. The first tenant moved in on a Tuesday. The first rent check arrived that Friday. I sat at Viola's kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Then I went back to work. 5 years later, Viola died of a stroke. She went quickly in her sleep, which she would have wanted. She left me her car, her library of tax law books, and $30,000 with a note that said simply, "You always knew what to do. Trust yourself." I put that money into 3 more properties, then 2 more. I hired a property manager. I took a course on commercial real estate and started looking at small mixed-use buildings, the kind with a storefront on the ground floor and apartments above. The kind in neighborhoods where rents were still low, but the city was starting to pay attention. By the time Naomi called me that Saturday morning, I had been quietly building for 16 years. I owned 23 properties across 4 cities. I had a small office in a building I owned, 2 employees, and a net worth I had never mentioned to anyone who hadn't earned the right to know it. I drove a practical car. I wore simple clothes. I'd built everything inside a life that looked, from the outside, completely ordinary. That was intentional. Power you don't advertise is power they can't take from you. But I hired someone after I hung up with Naomi, a private investigator named Theodore Ames, who had done a few quiet background checks for me over the years when I was vetting tenants. When I told him what I needed, he didn't blink. "Tell me about the original custody case," he said. I told him everything. He listened, made notes, and called me back in 10 days. He'd found the witness. Estelle's neighbor, the woman who testified I'd been drunk and disorderly. She had moved to a retirement community in Savannah. Her name was Loretta Pines, and she was 81, widowed, and according to Theodore, visibly uncomfortable when he mentioned Clifford Beaumont's name. I drove to Savannah on a Thursday. She answered the door in a house dress, and when she saw me, she tried to close it. I held it open, not forcefully, just steadily. I'm not here to threaten you, I said. I'm here because I lost my daughter, and I think you know you had something to do with that. The silence stretched. Then she stepped back and let me in. She made tea. Her hands shook. She told me that Estelle had pressured her, that she'd been behind on her mortgage, that Estelle had co-signed a loan that got her through, that she'd felt she had no choice. I never saw you drunk, she said, not looking at me. I never saw you anything except walking to your car. I made it up because she told me what to say, and I was scared. She was crying before she finished the sentence. I have stage 3 heart failure, she said quietly. I've been thinking about it, about what I did. I'll sign something, an affidavit, anything. I want it on record before I go. Theodore had the paperwork notarized the following week. I held that document in both hands on the drive back to Atlanta and thought about what to do with it. I could file for review of the original custody determination. I could contact a family law attorney about the false testimony. I could send it to Naomi directly, let the paper do the work. But I thought about how that would look. I thought about how it would look, Wooders. I thought about a woman showing up 19 years later with a piece of paper saying I told you so. I thought about Naomi standing in a courtroom hallway in a yellow dress, and how much damage had already been done, and how damage that old needed to be met with something she could see and touch and understand. Not a legal document, but a life. Not yet, I decided. First she sees who I am. Then she'll understand what was taken from her. 3 weeks went by. I made calls. I arranged things. I was not cruel about it. I want to be clear about that. I didn't want to ruin her party. I wanted her to see the truth. There's a difference, and I held on to it. The engagement party was at a venue called the Harrington House, a restored Georgian estate outside of Decatur. The kind of place with wrought iron gates and valets and women in linen who all seemed to know each other. I arrived at 7:15 during the cocktail hour when the gathering was loosely organized and the room was full of conversation. I arrived in a car I had rented specifically for this evening, a black Cadillac Escalade, polished to a mirror finish, driven by a professional car service I used for client meetings. I stepped out in a suit I had had tailored in February for a closing ceremony on a commercial property in Nashville. Champagne silk. Simple and exact. Low heels because I had never needed height to take up space. My financial advisor, a man named Thomas, no wait, a man named Conrad Leslie, had asked to accompany me. He was 60, silver-haired, the kind of man whose presence read as significant without him having to say a word. I had told him what the evening was about. He had agreed immediately. Let's go, he said, and offered his arm. We walked in together. I saw Naomi before she saw me. She was standing near the bar, beautiful in a green dress, her arm through the arm of a tall man I assumed was Dalton. She looked happy, genuinely happy, the kind that comes from having your life arranged the way you want it. I felt something soften in me and harden at the same time. Then Clifford turned around. He was across the room, heavier now, the hair gone gray, a glass of something amber in his hand. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he thought he'd buried. His face went several colors in quick succession. He grabbed the arm of the woman next to him. Not Estelle. Estelle was gone 3 years ago. A second wife. Younger, who didn't know what she was witnessing. Estelle's sister did know. She was standing near the fireplace when she caught sight of me, and I watched her hand go to her throat. Naomi's future mother-in-law touched her arm, said something, nodded in my direction. Naomi turned. For a moment, neither of us moved. She had my cheekbones. I had never been able to see that in photographs. In person, it was unmistakable, and something about that detail, the simple biological fact of it, undid something inside me that I'd been holding closed for a long time. I crossed the room to her. "Congratulations," I said. "You look beautiful." Her face was doing 3 things at once: shock, anger, something underneath both of those that she was working hard to keep from the surface. "I didn't expect you to actually—" She stopped, looked at my suit, at Conrad beside me, at the car still visible through the tall windows. "I don't understand." "You invited me," I said gently. "I thought I'd come as myself." Dalton put out his hand. He seemed like a decent man, uncomfortable but polite. I shook it. I smiled at him. I told him she was lucky to have found someone who looked at her the way he did. He seemed surprised by that. Clifford materialized at Naomi's shoulder. "Eleanor," he said, "the way you say a word you've been dreading, Clifford." His eyes moved over me the way eyes do when they're recalculating. I gave him nothing. The evening went on. I sat at the table I'd been assigned, made conversation with Dalton's aunt and two of Naomi's colleagues, who seemed entirely unaware of any history and were simply curious about what I did. I told them. I watched their expressions shift as the numbers settled in. I didn't volunteer anything. I didn't perform. I just answered their questions honestly. Then Clifford's sister stood up to give a toast. She was 2 glasses in and looking at me from across the room with something that had curdled over the years into contempt. She talked about Naomi's resilience, about how Naomi had been raised by a devoted father and a grandmother who stepped up when others stepped away. She let the word others land where it was meant to land. There were polite applause, some confused looks from Dalton's family who didn't know the subtext. I stood up. The room quieted the way rooms do when someone does something unexpected. "I'd like to say a few words," I said. Not a question. Naomi's face went pale. "Mom," she started and then stopped. I think she surprised herself with the word. "My name is Opal Mercer," I said clearly. "I am Naomi's mother. I have not been in her life for 19 years, and she was told it was because I chose not to be." The room was completely still. That isn't what happened. I kept my voice even. Not cold, not hot, just clear. 19 years ago, I lost a custody case built on false testimony. A neighbor was pressured by my former mother-in-law to say she'd witnessed behavior that never occurred. That neighbor, who has since given a signed affidavit, has confirmed what I always knew. I was lied about. Systematically. And my daughter paid the price. I looked at Clifford. He was looking at the table. I sent Naomi a card every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation I knew about. None of them reached her. I looked at Naomi now. "I was there when you graduated high school. I stood across the street because I wasn't allowed on school grounds under the terms of a custody order that was built on lies. I drove 4 hours to stand on a sidewalk and watch you walk across the stage." Naomi's hand was pressed over her mouth. "I didn't come here tonight to ruin anything," I said. "I meant it. I came because my daughter is getting married, and she is the reason I built everything I built. Every single decision I made in the last 19 years was made with the knowledge that someday I would see her again. And when I did, I wanted her to see the truth, not the woman they made me out to be." I reached into my bag and set the notarized affidavit on the table in front of me. "This is from Loretta Pines, the woman who testified against me. She's written a full account of what she was asked to do and why." I didn't wave it around. I just left it there. My attorney has copies. If Naomi wants to pursue a legal review of the original custody determination, that option exists. If she doesn't, that's her choice. I'm not here for revenge. I picked up my water glass. I'm here because she's my daughter, and I am very proud of the woman she became, even though I didn't get to be part of it. I sat down. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Dalton's mother leaned over and said something quietly to his father, and the low murmur of conversation began again, careful and stunned. Naomi was on her feet. "Outside," she said to me. Not angry, or not only angry. Something else was driving it now. I followed her through the French doors onto the veranda. Dalton came too. I was glad for that. She would need him for this. "You've been there," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. "This whole time." "Yes. You were at my graduation. And your high school play. The one where you played the innkeeper." She blinked. "You were in the 3rd row. You wore a red coat." I had watched her through binoculars from the back of the auditorium. I didn't say that part. "I had photographs of every major moment of your life that I could get close enough to witness. I never stopped watching over you. Why didn't you—" she pressed her lips together. "Why didn't you fight harder? For custody. For access." I did fight. For 4 years I fought. Every motion Clifford filed, I responded to, Every appeal I could make, I made. And every time, his family had more money, better lawyers, and a story they had established early and stuck to. I looked at her steadily. There comes a point where continuing to fight through legal channels does more damage to your child than stepping back. I chose to build instead. I chose to be someone you could be proud of. I chose to wait until you were old enough to hear the truth and decide for yourself. She was crying now. Dalton had his hand on her back, not steering, just there. He told me you didn't want me, she said. He said you'd had problems, that you'd been let go from jobs, that you were unreliable. I know what he told you. He said the cards were from Grandma Estelle, all these years. I thought they were from her. I absorbed that. Estelle sending cards in my name, keeping Naomi just attached enough to the idea of maternal love to not go looking for the real thing. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. I own a portfolio of residential and commercial properties, I said. 23 units across Atlanta, Chattanooga, and 2 in Columbia. I have a team of 2 and a business that has been profitable for 11 years. I said it not to impress her, but to answer the question she hadn't quite asked yet. Where had I been? Had I been okay? Had I simply abandoned her for a comfortable life? I'd built it from a $40 bonus check in a broken duplex, and I built it for a reason. She looked up at me. There is a property, I said, a mixed-use building in Decatur. 2 commercial units on the ground floor, 4 apartments above. I bought it 2 years ago and I've been holding it. I had it in mind for something. I paused. I'd like Naomi's name to be on the deed alongside mine, as a wedding gift. I want to give you something I made myself. She stared at me. You don't have to accept it, I said. You don't have to accept it, I said. You don't owe me anything. I owe you 19 years, and no piece of real estate comes close to covering that. But it's what I have. Dalton said nothing. He was watching Naomi. She looked at me for a long time, the kind of looking that means someone is putting things together slowly, fitting shapes that have been wrong-sized their whole lives into new configurations. I don't know how to do this, she finally said. Neither do I said honestly. I've been preparing for this conversation for 19 years, and I still don't know how to do it. Something shifted in her face. Not warmth. Not yet. It was too early for warmth, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But something. I want to read the affidavit, she said. It's yours. She looked at Dalton. He nodded once, quiet and certain. We should go back inside, she said. You should, I agreed. This is your party. She turned toward the doors, then stopped. Turned back. Are you staying, if you want me to? She held the door open. I stayed. The letter arrived 11 days later. No greeting, no preamble, just her handwriting, which looked like mine. I had never known that before. I talked to Daddy. He didn't deny it. He said Grandma handled things he didn't have full control over, which is the most daddy thing he could possibly have said. I'm not ready to forgive anyone yet. I'm not sure I believe everything all at once. But I'm talking to a therapist, and Dalton is patient, and we both think you should come to the wedding. There are things I want to know. About you. About what the last 19 years actually look like. I'm not ready for all of it, but I'm ready for some. My number's at the bottom. Call me when you want. Naomi, I sat in my office and read it 4 times. Through the window, the city moved the way cities do, indifferent and continuous, and I pressed the paper to my chest the way I used to press her letters, before I understood they'd never reach her. Then I found Viola's photograph on my bookshelf, the one from the day we closed on the duplex, both of us squinting into the sun, her arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning like we'd gotten away with something. We did it, I told her. She called me. I picked up my phone. I called my daughter.